My ex-best friend stole my girlfriend and told me it was my fault. When I confronted him, I learned the shocking truth. The moment I found out my best friend had stolen my girlfriend, it was like my world shattered. I mean, we were like brothers, right? How could someone I trusted with everything, every secret, every moment, turn around and hurt me like this? And what made it worse? He didn't even feel guilty. He told me it was my fault, that I deserved it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But when I finally confronted him, the truth hit me like a punch to the gut. The reason he did it was something so unexpected, so unbelievable, I never saw it coming. I couldn't ignore the feeling that something had been ripped away from me, something that I'd never be able to get back. Jake had always been like family, and Emma, well, I had imagined a future with her, but now, I was left alone, trying to pick up the pieces of a life that had suddenly been torn apart. It wasn't until I received a message from Jake one evening that I knew I couldn't ignore the situation any longer. Slowly, I noticed little changes in how Jake was acting, strangely distant, avoiding me, not showing up like he used to. Little did I know, he was already plotting something that would destroy everything I thought I knew about loyalty, trust, and friendship. It was a warm autumn afternoon when the first real cracks in my friendship with Jake started to show. The golden sun bathed everything in a soft, nostalgic glow, but underneath the beauty, a storm was brewing. The farm was where we had spent countless hours together as kids, and even as adults. It had become a place of refuge. It was a simple life, full of hard work and good times, and the land felt like home. The scent of freshly cut hay mixed with the earthy smell of the barn, and in the distance you could hear the sound of animals moving through the fields. The old wooden fence was worn from years of use, the paint chipped and faded, but it still stood strong. Much like the bond I thought I shared with Jake, Jake had always been the confident one, the guy who could light up a room with his smile. He had this effortless charm that drew people in, and I admired him for it. I, on the other hand, was more reserved, the steady one who liked to keep things grounded. While I was focused on running the farm and keeping things in order, Jake was always the one to push me out of my comfort zone. We had our differences, but that's what made us work as a team. He'd convince me to go out for drinks when I needed to relax, and I'd remind him when it was time to buckle down and get to work. Our personalities balanced each other out. But lately, something was different. Jake had started acting strange. At first, it was subtle small things like him canceling plans at the last minute, or showing up late for our usual meetups. I thought he was just busy, maybe with work or some personal stuff he didn't want to talk about. But then it happened. I walked into the barn one evening, and there they were. Jake and my girlfriend, Emma, standing way too close for comfort. She was laughing at something Jake said, her hand resting on his shoulder, a softness in her gaze I hadn't seen before. I froze. The moment felt suspended in time, a sickening knot forming in my stomach. The laughter died when they saw me, and for a second, everything felt wrong. Like the whole world had shifted under my feet. I didn't confront them right away. I couldn't. The anger, the confusion, it all built up inside me, but I didn't have the words. What could I say? How could I confront my best friend about this? And Emma, she was someone I trusted with my heart. The betrayal cut deep, and I didn't know how to make sense of it. I started avoiding both of them, unable to process what was happening. But the more I tried to escape the reality of it, the worse it got. The tension between us grew thicker by the day. Jake and Emma started showing up together at the farm, laughing and talking like everything was normal. I couldn't ignore the feeling that something had been ripped away from me, something that I'd never be able to get back. Jake had always been like family, and Emma, well, I had imagined a future with her. But now, I was left alone, trying to pick up the pieces of a life that had suddenly been torn apart. It wasn't until I received a message from Jake one evening that I knew I couldn't ignore the situation any longer. He wanted to talk. The tone of the message was cold, almost detached, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever he had to say, it wouldn't be good. That's when I realized the full weight of the challenge ahead. Confronting the two people I loved most in the world, one who had betrayed my trust, and the other who had stolen my heart. No, I'm not blaming you. I screwed up, okay. I should have told you from the start. I should have stopped it before it got this far. But I didn't, and I hate myself for it. His words hung in the air, heavy with guilt. I couldn't think straight. The betrayal, the lies, it was too much. I turned away, pacing across the shed, trying to calm the storm inside me. You were supposed to be my best friend, I whispered, my voice trembling. Jake looked down at the ground, his His shoulders slumped. I know, and I'm sorry. I didn't know how to face you. I messed up everything. But the images of them laughing in the barn, standing too close together, kept replaying in my head like a broken record. Every time I closed my eyes, the doubt and anger came rushing back. What had I done wrong? That question haunted me. The meeting tension and revelation. The next day, I arrived at the farm shed a few minutes early. The place held so many memories. As kids, Jake and I used to hide here when we got in trouble. The walls were lined with old tools, and dust hung in the air like ghosts of the past. The faint creak of the wooden door opening made me look up. Jake stepped in, his hands in his jacket pockets, his usual confident stride, strangely subdued. For a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other. The silence felt unbearable, but I wasn't going to be the first to speak. I wanted answers, and I wasn't going to let him off easy. Finally, Jake broke the silence. Look, man, I know you're pissed, you have every right to be, but I need to explain. His voice was calmer than I expected, but it didn't ease the tension. I crossed my arms and glared at him. Explain what, Jake? That you're trying to take Emma away from me. He flinched, but there was no anger in his eyes, just guilt. For the first time in years, I saw Jake vulnerable, like the mask he always wore had cracked. He let out a heavy sigh and leaned against the workbench. It's not like that. Well, not exactly, he muttered. A painful confession. The truth emerged. Jake looked up at me, his expression pained. Do you remember last summer, when Emma came to me for advice about you? I frowned, my mind racing. Advice? What are you talking about? Jake hesitated, like he was debating whether to tell me the truth or keep it buried. She was worried about you. She said you'd been pulling away, that you weren't opening up about your feelings anymore, she thought. Maybe you didn't care about her as much as you used to. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. My heart dropped as I tried to make sense of it. That's not true. I care about her more than anything, I snapped, my voice rising. Jake held up his hand, his voice soft. I know, man, but you didn't show it. She came to me because she didn't know what else to do. At first, I just listened. I told her to talk to you about it. But the more time we spent together, the more I realized how she felt, and before I knew it, we crossed a line. I felt my blood boil. My hands clenched into fists. So, what? You're telling me this is my fault now? That I made her fall for you? Jake shook his head quickly, his tone desperate. No, I'm not blaming you. I screwed up, okay? I should have told you from the start. I should have stopped it before it got this far, but I didn't, and I hate myself for it. His words hung in the air, heavy with guilt. I couldn't think straight. The betrayal, the lies, it was too much. I turned away, pacing across the shed, trying to calm the storm inside me. You were supposed to be my best friend, I whispered, my voice trembling. Jake looked down at the ground, his shoulders slumped. I know, and I'm sorry. I didn't know how to face you. I messed up everything. But instead, you let it all happen behind my back. In that moment, I was no longer just angry. I was heartbroken, and the weight of everything hit me like a tidal wave. I felt like I was standing in the ruins of my past, and there was no way to rebuild it. Before I could say anything else, a voice interrupted us. Garrett, wait, it was Jake. I thought about Emmy, about all the moments we'd shared. The dreams we'd talked about. The life I thought we were building together. Had I really been so blind? Had I failed her? And Jakey was like a brother to me. I remembered the nights we'd stayed up talking about our plans, our goals. We swore we'd always have each other's backs, no matter what. But now, everything felt broken. I didn't know if I'd ever be able to forgive him. For the first time in a long time, I let the tears come. Standing there in the middle of the fields, with the wind brushing against my face, I felt everything all at once. Anger, sadness, betrayal. And beneath it all, a deep ache I couldn't ignore. The people I loved most had hurt me in ways I never thought possible. And I didn't know how to move forward. But one thing was clear: I couldn't keep running from the truth. I had to face it, no matter how painful it was. The night had fallen, and the farm was cloaked in darkness. The only sound was the rustling of leaves in the wind and the occasional creak of the old barn door as it swayed. I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying Jake's words over and over, the weight of what had happened pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. I kept telling myself to let it go. But something in me refused, something deep inside told me I needed to confront it all, to end the cycle of pain. The next morning, I made my decision. I was going to confront Emma. I had to hear the truth from her, and I wasn't going to sugarcoat it. If there was any chance of understanding why everything had gone wrong, it was now. I couldn't let things fester any longer. I found her at the old oak tree near the creek, a place we'd gone to when we wanted to be alone, away from everything. She was sitting with her back to me, her knees pulled to her chest, staring out at the water. Her hair, the same golden brown I'd always loved, fell loosely around her shoulders. I stood there for a moment, watching her, my heart pounding in my chest. "Emma," I called softly. She didn't turn around, but I could see her shoulders stiffen. She knew why I was here. Finally, she stood up and turned to face me, her eyes red, like she had been crying. "I know why you're here," she said quietly. "I've been waiting for you to ask." My voice cracked as I spoke, the anger and hurt still raw. "Why, Emma, how could you do this? How could you choose him over me?" Emma took a deep breath, her eyes searching the ground before meeting mine. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she said, her voice trembling. "I never wanted to hurt you, Garrett, but things between us, they changed. I thought you were pulling away, that you didn't care about me anymore. I felt like I was losing you." Her words felt like a punch to the gut. I shook my head, barely able to process what she was saying. "That's not true. I loved you, Emma. I still do. But instead of talking to me, you ran to Jake. You turned to him." Emma's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I didn't know what else to do. "Jake was there for me when you weren't. He was the one who listened to me when I was struggling. When I needed someone to talk to. I never meant for it to go this far." I could hear the regret in her voice, but it wasn't enough. My mind was racing, and I couldn't hold back anymore. "You should have talked to me. You should have trusted me. But instead, you let it all happen behind my back." In that moment, I was no longer just angry. I was heartbroken, and the weight of everything hit me like a tidal wave. I felt like I was standing in the ruins of my past, and there was no way to rebuild it. Before I could say anything else, a voice interrupted us. "Garrett, wait." It was Jake. He had been standing at the edge of the clearing, watching us. His face was pale, his eyes filled with guilt and sorrow. But this time, there was no defense in him, no excuses, just raw, unfiltered emotion. "I never wanted to hurt you," Jake said quietly, taking a hesitant step toward us. "I screwed up. I know I can't undo it. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I want you to know, I didn't mean for things to turn out like this." The weight of his words hung in the air, suffocating the space between us. It felt like the entire world had come crashing down on me, and I wasn't sure if I could handle it. Every ounce of anger, confusion, and betrayal was bubbling to the surface, and I didn't know what to do with it. I looked at Emma, then at Jake, and I realized something in that moment. The hurt, the lizard, was all too much to carry. But I wasn't going to let it destroy me. I couldn't. I took a deep breath, my voice shaking as I spoke. "I don't know what's going to happen from here. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. But I'm done fighting over this. I just want to move on." There was a long silence before Jake spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I understand." And just like that, the moment of truth had arrived. The three of us stood in the aftermath of our choices, realizing that while we couldn't change the past, we could control what came next. For the first time, I understood that healing wasn't about holding on to the pain, it was about learning to let go. As I walked away from the clearing, my heart felt heavy, but strangely lighter at the same time. The confrontation had been brutal, but it had cleared the air between us. There were no more lies, no more secrets hanging between me, Emma, and Jake. The air, once thick with anger and betrayal, now felt empty, quiet. Like the calm after a storm. Emma didn't follow me. She knew the distance had grown too wide between us, and no words could bridge it. She was standing by the creek, her silhouette framed by the soft light of the setting sun, her gaze fixed on the water. I wanted to run back to her, to tell her I could still fix things, but something inside me knew it was too late. Jake was gone too, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The fields stretched out in front of me, the land I had spent years trying to cultivate, trying to protect. But now, everything felt different. Like I was standing in a place that no longer felt like home. I thought about how things had been so simple before. There were no complications, no betrayals. But now, I was alone, left to rebuild not just my trust in people, but my belief in myself. I needed time, but I wasn't sure how much time I had left before everything spiraled further out of control. I turned back toward the farmhouse. The door creaked as I pushed it open, the familiar scent of the barn mixing with the smell of fresh coffee from the kitchen. But there was something off. The house, once filled with the sounds of laughter, felt cold and distant now, like it was as much a stranger to me as the people I had once called family. Then, I saw it. A letter, left on the kitchen counter. It was addressed to me, the handwriting familiar to familiar. It was from Emma. I hesitated before picking it up. My hands were shaking as I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. Garrett, I've left. I couldn't stay here anymore, not after everything that happened. But there's something you need to know, something I didn't tell you when we talked. I never meant for it to go this far, but I think you deserve to understand the truth. I hope one day you can forgive me. Maybe we can talk again. But for now, I need space to figure things out. Take care, Emma. I stood there, staring at the letter, the words sinking in like cold water. There was more. There was always more. What hadn't she told me? What had she left out? My mind raced, the weight of her words pulling me in a direction I wasn't sure I wanted to go. I glanced at the old photograph on the wall of us, happy and unaware of the storm that was coming. It didn't make sense. Emma, running away, leaving a letter instead of facing the truth head-on. Something felt off. Just then, I heard the sound of footsteps outside. Someone was coming. I wasn't sure if it was Jake or Em or someone else entirely. The door opened, and there was a figure standing in the doorway, shrouded in shadow. Garrett? The voice was soft, but unmistakable. I froze. It was her. As the door creaked open, I stood frozen, my mind spinning. Was this really Emma standing there, or was it someone else entirely? The truth, the unanswered questions, it all felt like it was closing in on me, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to face what was coming next. But that's the beauty of this story, right? The twists and turns that keep us hooked, wondering what's really going on behind the scenes. I want to hear from you. What do you think is going to happen next? What's Emma's secret, and why did she leave that cryptic letter? Did Jake really mess up, or is there more to the story than we know? Drop your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Love reading your perspectives and engaging with you all. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another twist. We've got plenty more stories coming your way. You won't want to miss what happens next in the saga of Garrett, Jake, and Emma. What if the truth isn't as simple as it seems? What hadn't she told me? What had she left out? My mind raced, the weight of her words pulling me in a direction I wasn't sure I wanted to go. I glanced at the old photograph on the wall of us, happy and unaware of the storm that was coming. It didn't make sense. Emma, running away, leaving a letter instead of facing the truth head-on. Something felt off. Just then, I heard the sound of footsteps outside. Someone was coming. I wasn't sure if it was Jake or Em or someone else entirely. The door opened, and there was a figure standing in the doorway, shrouded in shadow. Garrett.